G'day guys, I'm Rob dingel-diy and welcome back to another episode of dingel-diy. Today we're going to be installing a door jamb and a door. So I'll go over basically how you measure up your door jambs to suit your door and the way I go about installing both. So we'll start off with the door jamb and then we'll get stuck into hanging the door. Alright, I've got this basic drawing here. Now this is our door, our two sides and our header. Now to find the width of your header piece is just the thickness of your two sides, which is usually 20mm, plus a 3mm gap and a 3mm gap, plus the width of your door. So that gives us 666. If your flooring is already installed and your jambs will be sitting on top of the flooring, all you need to do is allow for the gap under the door. But if there is no flooring installed and your jambs are going to be hard down to the subfloor, don't forget to add the thickness of your flooring that is yet to be installed, which is about 20mm. But in my instance, the tiles are already down, so because it's slate, I'm going to have a 10mm gap underneath because they're pretty uneven. Normally you wouldn't have such a big gap, but I don't want the door scraping on the unevenness of the slate tiles. So for me, I've got a 2040 door, plus 3mm at the top, plus 10mm at the bottom. So that's 2053 for the sides and 666 for the top. Alright, I'm working with 70mm studs here instead of 90mm, so usually by the time you put the plaster on both sides, you end up with 110mm worth of jamb. But in my instance, because it's 70mm studs, 10mm plaster both sides, I've got 90mm jambs, which is why I've cut down this edge. I've ripped this board 20mm. So if you do that, you need to just chamfer any edges. It just helps with painting down the track. And that's why this side doesn't have any paint on it anymore, whereas this side does. So now we've got that out of the way, we can screw our three pieces together. Alright, when you're screwing these together, just want to make sure you get the edges as flush as possible. You always want to be pretty accurate with anything to do with doors, so the gaps look nice. Alright, the door jamb is roughly in position. Now, it's a bit tighter than I like. Normally you want some room to pack out the sides so that you can get them perfectly plumb, perfectly straight. But we're just going to work around that for now. Now what you want to do is get a straight edge and just check that the jamb is flush with the plaster. And that way your architraves are going to sit nice and flat when you nail them on. So once your head's level, screw in both sides and check them for plumb and check them for straightness. Obviously you want these parallel with the door without any curves and waves in them. I put two screws at the top, the middle and the bottom, side by side, so that you can rest some packers on top of the screws. Alright, the next thing we want to do is mark the thickness of our door, which is 30mm. Now depending which side you want your door to hinge, will depend on where you do this 30mm. This door will be opening in against this wall, so the hinges will be on this internal side. So that's where I measured the 30mm from. Now when it comes to hinges, you just mark them on the jamb, and then we put the door in the hole, rest it against these nails, and then we can transfer the mark that we measure for the hinges. We transfer it from the jamb, from our jamb onto our door, and that way we can cut out the recesses for our hinges, and then everything's going to line up and the door's going to be exactly where we want it. On the edge of the door there'll be a sticker, and that'll tell you which side you put your handle on. So if the sticker's on this side, the handle goes on this side, which means the hinges go on the back edge here. So make sure you get that right. Otherwise there's going to be no structure for you to screw your handles to. Alright, we're in the pantry now, so the door's resting against those nails we put in. I've got 10mm worth of packers underneath the door. Now that amount might change depending on the gap at the top of the door. Alright, so we've got a tight 3mm at the top, which means we can transfer the mark from the jamb onto the door. Alright, now our hinges are marked, we can pull the door out and check the hinges into the jamb and check them into the door. The best way to mark out your hinges is just to trace them. If you've got loose pin hinges, make sure you don't have the hinge upside down. Now there's some gaps where the two pieces join, and you can look through those gaps to see the jamb behind the hinge. That's how you're going to know if you've got the hinge square, as if these gaps are parallel with the jamb behind it. Now we can pull the nails out only on the hinge side. Now this here is a trim router, and you want to set the depth to the thickness of half the hinge, and you want to get this pretty perfect. So our depth is set, and now we can use this to take out the material in the jamb. Now you've done the bulk of the work with the router, you can clean this out with a chisel and get it perfect to the lines. Alright, now we can check that with our hinge. It's looking pretty good. I've just got my door in a chock here. That's just a big bit of wood, like a offcut from a post, and a wedge here. So that'll just wedge the door, hold it in place while we work on it. Once again, you want to use these gaps in the hinge and line them up with this edge of the door. So you won't be able to push the hinge hard across, you'll actually have to drag it back just a bit, and that's where we trace it. Alright, we just want to screw our hinges to our door. Now I like to leave 1 or 2 screws out depending on how many holes are in the hinge. Always leave at least one out. It might come in handy later if you need to adjust things. It's good to have a fresh start. So 2 screws for now, and then we'll put the 3rd one in once we're happy. Now we're going to put the 10mm worth of packers back on the ground, and then bring the door in and rest the hinges in those checkouts we've already done, and just put a screw in the middle of each hinge, so just 1 screw for now. Because if we need to manipulate the door, depending on how it shuts, we can manipulate it in many ways, and just by leaving a couple screws out, it's really going to help us. Now we kept these nails here, just so that we don't over-rotate the door. And now that we can close the door, we can have a good look at the gaps, and then maybe put a few extra packers or take some packers out, depending on what it needs, to get it looking perfect. Alright, here we can see we've got nice even gap the whole way down, and that gap is the same amount on both sides. So I'm happy enough with that I will put these screws in the hinge and finish it off. We'll leave it at that until we figure out what style of doorknobs we want to use. Alright, we're back and we've got our door handle kit. So this is the piece we're most interested in right now. This is what goes in first. You're going to need a spade bit to suit the same width as this, or a whisker bigger, but you don't want it to be bigger than the plate here. Otherwise, that'll show through once you've installed this. So we'll just measure up from the bottom of the door and mark it on the front, the back, and this edge here. And this is a 35mm wide door, so we're just going to measure in halfway, so 17.5. And now we're ready to drill. Alright, this is our latch here. Now these centers can move. So depending on whether you want the middle of your handle to be 60 or 70 mil, depends on where you slot this and where you drill your holes. Now the rest of them in the house are 60 mil, so we'll leave it there. The kits come with instructions and measurements if you want to use those, but for me I'll just measure it out. So we've got to drill a hole at 40 mil, 60 mil and 80 mil. So here's the close-up. We've got our 3 holes here and this in position. Now we need to check this in, so we've got to trace around the edge, take out a bit of the timber, same as we did the hinges, then we can screw it on. Now one thing to be careful of is the edges of the door. The main structure is like a pine frame with 2 sheets of masonite stuck to either side of the frame. Now where that masonite sticks to the pine, it's pretty easy to just blow it out and split it and ruin everything. So if you're chiseling close to that where that pine and masonite join, I recommend just carving it out with a sharp knife. That way you're just going to reduce the risk of blowing it out and having to patch it up or replace the door. Alright, we're ready to screw this in for good. I've just had it in there, I've checked that the holes line up, so if they don't, you just got to elongate your holes or make them bigger. Screw it in by hand as well, don't use a power tool. If you use a power tool, you run the risk of just, stripping out the timber and then the screws won't actually do anything. Now there's a good looking side and a less good looking side. The less good looking side is the one with the screw holes in it. Now if you can, have the handle with the holes in it on the less seen side, so obviously that's going to be inside the pantry, this will be in the kitchen. With that in mind, we can screw this on. Should have followed the instructions. Alright, I jumped the gun on the holes a bit. There's 2 ways to do it, so obviously one is the way I've done. Depending on which handles you have, some of them require you to use a hole saw to drill out a much larger hole in the middle. Now, after reading the instructions, I found out the hard way I need to use a hole saw, so I guess it's a bonus you get to learn how to do both ways. So, time for the hole saw, and then we should be able to throw the handle together. Alright, let's try this again now that we've got the hole drilled. Striker goes in. Now our handle fits.
A great success!
And then we put the screws in from behind. This is screwed on now. Just check it, feel it if it's binding. It should bounce back on its own. If it binds up at this point and then you have to physically lift the handle up to get the striker to come out, then something's not right. But that's operating how it should be. Now we can measure up from the edge of the door to the striker, and that's going to tell us where to put our striker plate. Alright, the important measurement here is from the flat part of the striker to the door. So we've got 12 mil there. Now we transfer that mark onto the jamb. Now we've just come in 12 mil from this edge onto the face. And the whole point of that is so that the door, when the latch is hitting the striker plate, the door is flush with the jamb. Otherwise, if that measurement's wrong, the door will be too far out or over rotating. Now we've got that measurement, we can just close the door and then sight the middle, and then that way we know at what height to put our striker plate. Alright, this is our striker plate here. Now it's it's basically a semicircle, so that flat edge will be this vertical line that we drew. And then we want the center of the plate on our center line. And once everything's in position, we'll just trace around it. Alright, now we can house this in the same way we did the striker, same way we did the hinges. And then we're going to drill using a spade bit. We're going to drill this center out so that the striker's got somewhere to go. Alright, that's a good start. Alright, there are some indentations here where the screws go. So I just like to V out the timber instead of, pre-drilling and countersinking. I can just use my chisel. But there we go, that's sitting flush and flat how we want it, so we can screw that in. Now the door is going to rattle without its door stops, so we want to push the door hard over, nail in our door stops, and then that's going to keep the door nice and tight and rattle free. Alright, it's a bit noisy outside, but we want to grab our shortest piece, chuck this on top, and we want a really small gap between the door and the edge of our doorstop. The only place we really want the doorstop physically touching the door is at the handle. So I'll show you a close-up once I get these nailed on. Alright, now we've got our first one in. We can put our sides hard down to the ground and then mark them on the spot. We'll trim these up and nail them off. Alright, there's that gap I was talking about. So that goes all across the top and down the hinge side. And the only spot it touches is right here. Now I touched bases on this before in the video where I renovated an ensuite, so we just want to measure in roughly our pieces of timber, and then we can put them in position and then mark them exactly when they're sitting in place, cut our angles and then shoot them on. Now you want to decide on what quirk you want to have. Now a quirk is what I call the step between the door jamb and the architrave. Now 3 or 4 mil is pretty ideal. So we just want to hold the architrave 3 mil off the edge of the jamb and then mark our 3 mil across the top. And then transfer that mark onto the architrave. So here we have the arc in position. This edge is 3 mil away from this face. And then just here is where we've transferred our mark. And then just do a rough marking to remind yourself which way you want to cut your angle. Alright, so what you want to do is just mark your first one and nail it on with just a couple nails. You don't want it there permanently. You might have to move it around or pull it off in case things go seriously wrong. But once you've got one on, you can butt your next piece into it, mark it, cut it. Same with this, mark it and cut it, and then these last 2 pieces aren't nailed on. You can wiggle them around and get the corner just perfect. And once you're happy with your lengths, you can just tack them on, put your brads in, glue up the corners, and once everything's looking acceptable, we just finish off nailing everything on permanently. I'm happy with where those are sitting, so I'll nail most of the way off, and then I'm just going to leave nailing the corners till last, because it looks like we're going to have to manipulate them just a little bit to get the miters spot on. Okay, we can see there's a bit of a gap in this joint. Now what that suggests to me is that these are rolling. So at the minute they're rolling backwards, we need to pull the back edge forward. And doing that is just going to close up the gap at the front, and everything's going to look how it should. So what that means is you either have to put a packer behind this front edge or nail it to the jamb properly. So we'll nail it to the jamb properly first and then pack out the back if we need to. Alright, we've packed out that back edge. Now we can hit this architrave across, and that's going to help close the gap up as well. And then we'll pin it off with some nails. Alright, lastly we just want to give it a quick sand, and that'll get everything exactly how we want it. Now a good piece of advice when you're using a nail gun like this that you're not really ever going to hear is when you're shooting this, the nails can come out on all kinds of different angles. Now if they are going to come out on an angle, they're going to bend up or they're going to bend down when you're holding the gun like this. So it doesn't really matter if they bend up when you're shooting into a vertical piece, but if you're holding the gun like this and you're shooting into a horizontal piece, there's a good chance the nail will bend down and come out the face of your timber, which is something you really don't want. So just make sure you're holding the nail gun the right way, up and down on your vertical pieces, and then hold it sideways on your horizontal pieces. So that way if you do get any bent nails, they're not going to pop out and ruin your timber. Alright, that's it for this video guys. I hope you learned how to hang a door from start to finish. Now, while I'm on this job site, I'll be doing a few other things like changing a window, so stay tuned for that. And I'm going to move on to skirting, so that'll be a quick video, but there are a few tips and tricks which are a bit different to architraves that you need to know if you want to tackle skirting yourself. So stay tuned for those videos. Other than that, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.